So, can we talk about something? So, first of all, I realized when I started this video that I'm wearing a shirt with my art on it while sitting against the wall with my art on it. I don't promote my art store enough, but I have an art store where you can buy my things. But anyway, I'm gonna be trying to watch Euphoria season 1 all in one sitting. Now, I know that that's kind of an ambitious thing. To my understanding, Euphoria is basically just non-stop trauma, but I think that I can handle it. So I wanted to do this thing where I watch all of Euphoria season 1 and come back after every episode and give you guys my quick thoughts, because I know that everyone's talking about it. It is trending all the time. I'm the sort of person who doesn't like to watch things when they're popular. I waited like 4 years before watching Breaking Bad because I just didn't want to, like be like all the other people and watch a popular show. But I'm finally reaching that point where I really feel like I need to watch this show. So right now it is like 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Hopefully I will finish this by the end of the day. We'll see how it goes. Okay, so we are about to begin. I will be right back with all of my thoughts about the first episode.
The only problem is most over-the-counter home drug testing kits come with a heat sensor strip that detects the temperature of your urine.
So first episode in, and there's already so many things to discuss. So in this video, I'm just going to be reacting to certain scenes in the episodes that made me think and giving you guys my commentary. And I want to go over my overall feelings about the show before I get into it too far. So first and foremost, I don't love narration as a way of framing a story. I often think that it doesn't work. I do think that oftentimes when there's narration in a film, that it is there because the film doesn't speak for itself. So I'm not really a huge fan of that, but hopefully it won't continue too far into the show. So right now, I want to just in general say that I am not very into the main character. I find Rue so far to be kind of an annoying character. I hope that that changes. Maybe things will change. Hopefully they do. That's good writing, but that's my initial thought about Rue. But I do like Zendaya and I'm willing to ride the entire show out for her. Another thing I don't love about this so far is that everyone looks so old. Everyone looks, to me, they look like they're in college more than high school. I knew that that was a general criticism, but it's kind of jarring, especially with some of the themes, because there are a lot of things in this show that remind me of college, but don't so much remind me of high school. So I already knew this, but there's a character in the show called Jules who is a trans woman. I love Jules' character so far. This has not yet been addressed in the show. I mean, it's been kind of alluded to when Nate confronts her at his party.
I know what you are. Yeah, I see you.
When he confronts her, he corners her and then sort of pressures her in a sexual way. He's on one hand clocking her and saying, I see what you are, and threatening her, but then also expressing a sexual attraction to her in some way. I've been in that position in life where you are in a situation where this guy knows who you are, can tell that you're trans, is pressuring you, threatening you, cornering you, and threatening violence, but also clearly expressing sexual attraction to you. And this is made even more complicated by the fact that earlier in the episode, Jules had sex with Nate's father. Now, I really liked that particular scene because it was so realistic, so relatable. I mean, I remember being a teenager, sneaking out, meeting these older men in motel rooms because I felt like I needed validation. I felt like I didn't fit into the typical romantic things that were happening in my friend group and things like that. And it was just easier for me to meet these honestly very abusive men online who were 100% not great for me. I just appreciate the realism of it. I remember when I was in that phase of life, I would meet a lot of men like Nate's father who wanting to be more open about who they are and what they like, but they're married, they've got kids, and they often have this really condescending way of speaking to you because they are sitting in a position where they are closeted and you're sitting in a position where you're out. And a lot of men in that position, they want to have this violent sex with you that they are usually pretty ashamed of, but they are to some degree jealous of the fact that you are able to live the life that you're currently living. And for some people, there is this undertone of things are so much different now. I wish that things could change. I wish that things were different for me when I was younger, you know, and I'm not going to deny or negate that completely. But in my personal experience with men like this, a lot of times they're just ashamed and afraid. And that's why they aren't out and open about who they are and what they like. They feel safer maintaining a life where they are not being seen as queer or any shade of not straight than they do actually claiming who they are and what they are. And a lot of times these men will get a lot older in life before they start living authentically. So I'm kind of curious to see where that character goes. Now, there's also a character named McKay, who was somebody who I was rooting for pretty immediately because he seems like, of the group of guys, the least misogynistic. He stands up for Jules. He stands up for several women. And, you know, I guess I still am rooting for him because his character really points at a problem in a society where sex is so accessible, where porn is so accessible, but sex education is just non-existent. There's a scene in the show where he is having sex with this girl who has experienced revenge porn. So the guys are talking about how open she is, how sexy she is, da-da-da-da-da. They basically present her as the easy option to have sex with that night. And he goes for it. McKay goes for it. And during sex with her, he decides to choke her. And there is a point being made in the show where that's how these men are learning about sex. These men are learning about sex because they are not getting proper sex education, but porn is just endlessly available to them. And that's how they learn about having sex, is through porn, which is increasingly more and more violent. And so I thought that was a really good thing to point out. And one of the things I will say so far is none of the questionable things that are happening in this show, in my opinion, feel glorified. A lot of the stuff that you're watching people do are shown in a way that is scary and upsetting. And you don't look at this and say, oh, it's so cool that they're doing these drugs or they're having this sex. You kind of feel the undertone of this is maybe not what you should do. I mean, I kind of really enjoyed my namesake's character, Kat, having the moment where she lost her virginity.
You watch porn?
Doesn't everyone?
Right, because she spent so much time being like, yeah, I'm a hoe, I'm a slut, yeah, I do this and do that, da-da-da-da-da. And then she did it, but you could tell that it might not have been everything she was presenting. But in a space where you're sort of encouraged to engage in these things and it's kind of seen as a very positive thing, you kind of feel like you have to sort of say those things and do those things. And I'm really curious to see where her character goes. So anyway, I guess I'm going to watch episode 2 and come back with my thoughts. Before I start episode 2, I put this up on Facebook Marketplace and I am going to be giving my old baby away. This is the sewing machine that I started sewing on and I just don't need it anymore because I got a new one over here and I am handing this baby off to a person who's going to appreciate it a lot more. And I guess I wanted to memorialize that since it's happening like right now. The person's coming like right now. Anyway, let's get into episode 2.
He didn't talk to his dad that much, but they didn't need to. They had a good relationship. He didn't like his mother either. She was weak and a pushover. Plus, she didn't take care of herself.
All right, so obviously the lighting's different because it's now after sundown. It's about 7 o'clock at night now, and I just finished the second episode, and I have a lot of thoughts. So at the very beginning of this episode, we have this conversation with Nate about his complex feelings around masculinity, and that is also juxtaposed with his complicated feelings about penis. And, I want to say that I think this is the first time I've ever watched a show that sort of captures these complexities in this way, in a way that I think is really accurate, because a lot of men that I have known, especially men who are in this position like this, they have this attraction to penis, but they don't really have an attraction to men. And for a lot of men, this is what brings them to being attracted to trans women. And throughout this episode, we see Jules very excitedly speaking to a new guy, and the guy turns out to be Nate. And it's not surprising to me that a man in Nate's position, or a kid, I guess, because he's a teenager, even though he looks like a 30-year-old man, has these really complex feelings around this sort of thing. He watched his father's porn. I guess I don't remember if I mentioned that or not, but in the previous episode, it was established that he found some of his father's porn, and his father has some really degrading, dominant sex with his partners, the way that he had sex with Jules, which it was pretty degrading. And I think that that's a really interesting thing to capture. And I appreciate them capturing that because this is very realistic to a lot of the men that I've dealt with, especially when I was younger. Also in this episode, we have this subplot about Kat's sex tape being leaked. Now, maybe it's because this is my namesake, but I really like Kat as a character so far. I feel like she might annoy me at some point, but so far I find her to also be a really interesting character. Basically what happens is she has this sex tape leaked by the men that she lost her virginity to. The video goes viral. People start saying that it's her. And then one of the boys that she was with that night decides to counter the rumor by essentially saying that it wasn't actually her.
Cat? Nah, it was some other bitch.
But she has complex feelings about this because she later finds the video on Pornhub and she sees all of these really positive comments under it. And especially when you're a teenager, especially when you're young like that, it can really feel validating to be objectified in a weird way. And you can kind of see that in some of the other characters as well, where you've got these young women who, us as the audience, we're observing their relationships, and it's very clear that their relationships are unhealthy. Nate's current girlfriend is a good example of that, where you can tell that she's, enjoying being desired, but not quite seeing all the toxicity in it. And she obviously is engaging in some toxicity herself because she decides to lie to Nate and say that this guy who he saw her basically simulating sex with at a party raped her instead of actually what happened, which was she was trying to be with him in order to make Nate jealous.
I'm just trying to get back at my really shitty ex-boyfriend.
In this episode, Nate finds that guy who turns out to be a college-age kid and brutalizes him. And there are some very weird, kind of almost sexual aspects to the way that he brutalized him, which I thought was also quite interesting.
Please don't do this, dude. Hurt me, please. Don't do this. Get on your knees. What?
Because one of the things about men in this position is that they are often really struggling with masculinity and all of the various pressures and nuances that come with it. This episode makes it clear that Nate has this really particular image of masculinity that he wants to uphold. And you see him having these very private relationships with Jules. We don't find that until the very end, while also going through all of these various things in his life to protect the image of masculinity that he has. He was interested in Maddie predominantly because she was a virgin, because she's hairless, because of all of these things that make him feel more masculine. But we can tell that his masculinity is quite fragile by the very fact that he feels so uncomfortable sharing a gym room with other men. I think that's because he's probably going through complex feelings with his sexuality, but still it is, I think, a pretty good portrayal of that. And I kind of really like that this show is showing the sort of messy nuances of this. One of the things I will also say is that this episode started out with Rue's narration, but did not go through the entire episode with narration. And I Love that. I think it's making the show so much better. I hope they drop it entirely. I understand why they started out this episode with narration, but honestly, we don't need it. We don't need narration. We don't need to hear, every waking thought. Again, I've always thought that smarter storytelling in film is done by showing you this stuff instead of telling you the stuff. And to be frank, I think that they could have shown all aspects of the Nate storyline without literally saying it. I think that they actually had all the footage to do that, but for some reason they probably went in after and did the narration, if I were to guess how that actually ended up going. But anyway, it is getting later and I'm trying to pull through. It is literally 7 o'clock on the dot. I think I'm going to order some food right now. I did hand off my sewing machine and I got $60 for it. That's what I put it up there for. So I'm going to order some Postmates or something because we're going to be here for a bit. We've still got 6 hours to go. So let's see how far we can get through this.
Could I pay the rest tomorrow?
Oh, I'm sorry, baby. There's a policy.
Oh, hey, Kat, I got you.
Oh, hi.
How you doing?
I'm good.
Sweet.
How are you?
I'm good. Hey, Erica. How much was it?
$3.25.
All right, so my Postmates is mostly consumed, and I finished episode 3. So here are my thoughts. So first and foremost, I appreciate that they have really toned down the narration. But at the very beginning, when she's giving the narration about Kat, I realized that one of my biggest annoyances with the narration is that Rue, and this is just where I'm at currently, Rue is, in my opinion, a very painfully unlikable character. And I have a hard time placing her character in this universe where she knows enough about people to be able to say all these things. Like, how does she know about Kat's trip to Jamaica when she was a child? Like, it doesn't really make a lot of sense to me. So I think that another one of my annoyances with the narration, even, aside from the fact that I don't like it as a framing technique, is just the fact that it doesn't seem to really fit the narrative. Why is Rue this all-knowing person who has all of these deep understandings about people who don't really even interact with her? That's the thing. It's like you don't really even see these characters interact with each other, and yet she knows so much about them. So that was my first big complaint about episode 3. So speaking of Kat, this is the episode where we see her starting to do sex work. She starts to get into financial domination.
I want you to take complete control of me. I want to be your cash pig.
And degradation play. And I do not support underage sex work, but I definitely do understand being a minor and doing these shifty things online and getting validation from strangers when you don't feel attractive. And that's honestly, in a way, kind of a theme throughout this episode in some ways. Jules is continuing her relationship with Nate. It's unclear at this point if Nate is aware of the fact that he's speaking to Jules. I don't know what's what at this point, but there's a really interesting conversation that happens between Rue and Jules because they're fighting a lot, and because Rue is starting to get feelings for Jules and is kind of getting a little bit jealous of the fact that Jules is giving attention to this guy on her phone who clearly isn't good for her. And it's funny, at the time of me filming this, I am editing my video where I talk about how people would have responded to people trying to help them or assist them with hypersexuality. And one of the things I talk about is how defensive you would get when somebody points out just how unsafe it all is. Because in this episode, it's established that she is planning to meet Nate and she does not know who this person is. And she just goes down this whole list of all of the reasons why it's totally okay that she's going to meet him privately in a place where people don't see them. I mean, it's the standard list of, oh, he's a jock and his family is conservative and da-da-da-da-da. And like, these are all excuses, kind of going back to what I said about his father earlier on in this season. A lot of times these guys are just afraid of embracing themselves, and that's obvious, but you can get caught up in, justifying the relationship because if you're a trans person, a queer person, LGBT, whatever, you understand the social stigma against you. And so you can kind of start to make these excuses and defenses for the reasons why people can't publicly claim you. As you get older, you start to recognize how little these relationships feed you. And the point that Jules was trying to make to Rue is that Rue is able to engage in cisnormative society and have people publicly express attraction to her in a way that isn't politicized.
Rue, this is the difference between, like, you and me. Like, I don't always get the privilege of meeting people in front of a fucking audience or something. Like people here know
Joyce,
I'm
that
trans.
doesn't mean that you have to meet this dude at like a fucking deserted lake in the middle of nowhere.
For a trans person, every single time I'm out and about and some man loudly expresses attraction to me, which happens often, I have to think about how he might not know that he's speaking to a trans person, and he might be violent if he understood that he was speaking to a trans person. And also, these people watching him hit on me might laugh at him if they know that he's speaking to a trans person. And then what is his response going to be, right? And so in some ways, these private, secretive relationships can feel more validating. They can feel like you're actually participating in the stuff that you've always wanted to participate in. For me, I got to a point in my life where I was like, you know what? I'm worth more than that. You put your foot down, you say, I'm worthy and I don't need to settle. And believe it or not, you get that. And let me tell you, the quality of men that I've dated since then has only gotten better and better and better and better. You get quality time with people who actually do give a fuck about you. So I really appreciated that aspect of it. Now, Nate is still with Maddie, the woman who he fucked up this guy over. And I think that it's such an interesting study of masculinity because at some point, Maddie goes through his phone while he's in the shower and she discovers all of these dick pictures. And I wish I could explain this in a way that makes sense, but I know that especially people who are monosexual, who are very cis-sexist in their attractions. I know that a lot of people are going to have a hard time understanding this, but there are a lot of men who are incredibly attracted to a penis, but are not attracted to men. And a lot of those men are men who pursue trans women. Those are not men that I date personally, and it's interesting because at least from what Zendaya has said about him, which again, why does she know all this stuff about this guy? Doesn't really make sense. He would probably not admit or acknowledge an attraction to men, but it's very clear from the pictures that you see in this episode, which side note, this show shows so much dick. We haven't seen a single vulva, but we've seen hella dick. It's clear that these are photos from men. And I think that that's something worth unpacking and understanding. And I hope that we have more of a fuller picture of that as the show goes on. Now, as an aside, I am not pro Nate. I think Nate is not a good person. I think he's a very challenged person. But at the same time, he is also somebody who embodies a lot of things that I have observed in men. And I appreciate the fact that this is the narrative, this is the story being told, because this is an aspect of society that is really hard to talk about, very hard to explain and understand, because so many people would turn to a person like Nate and just say that he's a closeted gay dude. But Nate is very obviously somebody who's attracted to women, pursues women, has expressed nothing but disgust for being with a man. There are men who have a sexuality that doesn't quite fit with the way that a lot of people conceptualize sexualities in general. So I appreciate that this show is showing that, even if it's showing it in a really kind of raw way, because that is so realistic to just the experiences I've personally had with men. Anyway, let's get back into the episode. I'm going to continue organizing and cleaning, and we'll watch season or episode 4.
I think I want to go home. And that's when Jules realized this wasn't a tour at all. It was an elaborate plan to admit her to a fucking psychiatric hospital.
Mom? Mom? No, 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 no!
Okay, we have finally reached the midpoint of the first season. I just finished episode 4, and I have literally so many thoughts. So I guess at this point, to me, it's pretty clear that the sort of theme of every episode is it specifically focuses on one character. I don't know why it's taking me so long to realize that, but that's kind of what it is. And this episode focused on Jules. And I wanted to start out this particular conversation by saying that I really like the way that Jules as a character is presented. What I mean by that is so frequently when you have a trans character in things, you have to like beat the audience over the head with the fact that she's trans. I wonder if I went into this show without knowing that Jules was trans, how I would have felt about this episode, because I'm sure it would have probably have had a different impact. But I really appreciate that they are putting an emphasis on who she is currently and how she currently fits into the world, but she's still so young and still in a place of insecurity. And there were so many things in this episode that hinted towards that and capitalized on that. So let's talk about them. So in this episode, a couple of things happen. Jules finally ends up figuring out that the man that she had sex with in the first episode is Nate's father. And she also ends up meeting the man, and it turns out to be Nate. And this was such an interesting episode because you really got to see the kind of situation that a lot of trans women end up being in. You've got this character, Cal Jacobs, who is the popular man in town. He is literally the embodiment of a hyper masculine straight man who has an image to protect. He built most of the city. He owns most of the land. If information about what he was doing got out there, it would pretty dramatically impact his reputation. I have a lot of things to say about that because stuff like your sexuality being used against you can really only be used against you when you are viewing it as something that makes you lesser than. And in situations like that, where you've got these men who are closeted, who aren't out about what they're interested in, what they do, and we saw this in both Cal and with Nate, is instead of understanding that what I just said about themselves, they want to put the burden onto trans women.
Nate, stop.
God, are you broken inside? And that's precisely why I don't trust you.
I remember when I was younger feeling so self-loathing because I felt like if a man was caught with me, it would ruin his life. Because a lot of men would say that shit to me. A lot of men would make it seem like if anyone knew that we were together or had sex, that their entire lives would be ruined, right? And so what that ends up meaning is that I had a lot of relationships like Jules that were, meeting in the middle of a park at the end of the night or pulling over, in the back lot of the fair to have a conversation. And Cal and Nate both have this kind of confrontation with Jules. And one of the things that they say is, don't tell anyone about this. It's going to ruin me. Now, there's a different approach. Jules is kind of offended when Cal comes to her and is like, don't tell anyone about this, because she had no intention to. She told one person, her best friend, and it wasn't really going to go further than that.
Oh my fucking God.
What?
That's him.
Who?
The guy.
What guy?
The one from the motel.
Okay, what guy are we looking at?
Okay, the one in the apron serving the chili. I swear to God.
No fucking way. Jules, do you know who that is?
Yeah, the guy from the motel.
It's Cal Jacobs.
And one of the things I've always been kind of entertained by, and maybe this is just my own way of interacting with this, is I've been with a lot of men like this who are so paranoid about people knowing that we're together. And where I personally sit is, you're not important enough for me to expose you. I don't want to be involved in any sort of weird exposing thing when it comes to me, because in my personal opinion, exposing a man for being with me in the context of, oh my God, isn't it so disgusting that this person had sex with me, is only something I would do if I didn't like myself. It's only something that I would do if I didn't see myself as worthy, right? It's not something I would do if I actually saw myself in a really positive way, right? So I don't really get it when men get that paranoid, but I do know that there are some girls who do that exposing shit. And I guess I wanted to also take a moment to acknowledge that this is one of the many reasons why a lot of trans women end up getting murdered, is because a lot of men are just so paralyzed by the very idea that someone could know that they're involved with them, that they are willing to just completely go to the end of the earth to make sure that it never happens. And for some people, that means killing them. Nate had a very different sort of reaction. Cal, from what I could tell, sort of trusted that she wasn't going to expose him or whatever like that. But Nate had the reaction of a person who is truly going through some shit. So to go through it, basically what happened is they decided to meet late at night in a park. Had this meeting several times in my life. And at first, Nate comes to her and says, I've never felt closer to anyone in my life. I have had an amazing time speaking to you, and you make me feel heard and understood. And that's the thing. A lot of these men who are having these deep, intimate, long conversations, 'cause listen, there were times where I would speak to men for months, right? For months. And on one hand, in a way, they are having probably the most honest conversations with you. The conversations that they can't have with other people. They're talking about their attractions. They're talking about their interests. Maybe they're still curating it so that you don't seem repulsed by everything that they're actually into, but they're still being way more honest with you than they are with the average person in their lives, right? And so you've got that, and that's true and that's real. But then you also have the reality, which is that they are still, by virtue of you being a secret, they are still ashamed of what they're doing. And so what happens in a lot of situations like this is the moment that they feel judged by you, right? Judged by you, someone who has no right to judge them because you are the thing that they're ashamed of, right? That's when they will switch. That's when they will flip. I don't think I mentioned this, but in the first episode, when Jules comes over to his house to party, he's bullying her, calling her a freak and all types of shit. And she defensively cuts her arm and says, you think you can hurt me? Because she's clearly been through some shit. And that's another conversation. So frequently people view trans women as these easy punching bags, these overly sensitive snowflakes or things like that. But life as a trans person, especially somebody who transitions very young, is really rough. And it prepares you for a degree of bullshit that most people don't ever have to think about, right? And we see at the very beginning of this episode that her mother wanted to put her into a psychiatric hospital because she didn't accept her for being transgender, and that she dealt with self-harm while in that space because she was so suicidal, because she was experiencing dysphoria and did not have a lot of guidance when it came to that, right? So what Nate ends up saying when she expresses rejection, I guess, is, you're broken. You're broken. And look, this show is too real, because I've had so many conversations like this where these men, because of the way that they view you, because of where their life is and how they look at you as the complete foil to their image of masculinity, of, heterosexuality, the privilege that they have access to as people who can at least pretend that that's who they are. They see you immediately as a threat to that. And instead of, again, interpreting that they're the ones who are broken, I guess you could say, they're the ones who have issues that they have to deal with, they will turn around and say, you're the weird freak who is ruining my life. You're broken. Where it's very obvious. I mean, I think out of all the characters, Jules is probably the most self-assured, right? Even though she's dealing with this complex closeted thing, which again, I hope she grows out of. It's definitely a, she's definitely a person who actually does have an understanding of herself, because she's had to have a more intense understanding of herself as a trans woman, right? I know there are a lot of people where their biggest criticism was like, oh my God, I can't, it's not realistic. And why are these people doing all of these crazy, weird things? But for me, it really, truly does feel like an accurate representation of a lot of the experiences that I've had in so many different ways. So there's obviously more things to talk about in this episode, but I think that's basically what I want to talk about. So I guess we're going to move past the halfway point and go into episode 5 right now.
But she never really had any desire to have a career or job. She was just interested in doing what she did, just without school and the other bullshit.
So I had a few feelings about this episode, but I want to say that my biggest feeling right out the gate is that I felt like episode 5 was kind of a bit of a filler episode. Yeah, stuff happens. Technically, we do get to learn a little bit more about Maddie, but the most that we really get to understand about her is that she wants to be hot and do nothing, which, you know, support that for her, of course. But, you know, I just didn't really get much from the episode, if I'm being completely frank. There's a bit of character development for Nate's father. He's supposed to, I guess, be a tragic character because he's cheating on his wife with children. So basically what happens in this episode is Nate gets called into the office for apparently abusing Maddie. And then there's this whole conversation about image once again, because of course Cal is terrified.
Cal, you okay?
Yeah. Need a second.
Now, what had happened was, that morning, Maddie went to school.
What are you, the Unabomber? What are you, a dominatrix? No.
He feels guilty because of his own actions. He believes that he has inspired Nate to probably act in a poor way, and he's attributing it to his private homosexual desires. But the reality is he's just not a good person. People like Nate and his father are usually pretty abusive in general. You know, it's funny because watching this, I'm remembering parts of my life that happened a really, really long time ago. I don't deal with men like this. I haven't dealt with men like this in a really long time, but this is a real thing. A lot of these men are cheating on their wives. A lot of these men are violating the consent of their partners. Both Nate and his dad are cheating on their wives with trans women, with cis men. You know, they are privately pursuing something sexual and not talking about it with their partners. They have to find out, or in the case of Nate's mother, she has no clue. And, you know, these guys are not good people. And I like towards the end of the episode, there was kind of an effort to make him seem redeemable. And I guess I understand kind of what is being said, because yes, these men are indeed struggling, but they're hurting so many people in the process. I mean, the answer to whether or not his actions as Nate's father have impacted Nate is absolutely yes. He is terrified of disappointing his father. But who is his father? From a very young age, Nate has known his father to be sexually abusive, to disrespect his mother. Nate says early on in the season that he doesn't even like his mother. So of course that's going to be reflected in the way that he treats his partners. I mean, both Maddie and Jules have been treated very poorly by Nate. You know, neither of these people are having a positive relationship with this guy, and he almost doesn't know how to have a functional relationship because of how much he's hiding. And this is true for both Nate and his father. I'm kind of curious to see if this show will go in the direction of maybe one of these men embracing themselves, but I kind of feel like that's probably not going to be the case. I didn't mention in the last episode, Rue and Jules became more of an actual, I don't want to say actual couple because it's still up in the air, but there was mutual expressed interest. At first, Rue kissed Jules and she didn't really go for it, and now they're kind of figuring it out. But from what they've discussed, it seems like they're still going to be in situations where they're seeing other people, but they have a really strong, you know, romantic and, you know, friendship connection with each other. So who knows? I'm curious to see where this goes. I know that a lot of relationships are messy like that, but yeah, overall, I kind of feel like this episode was a filler episode. We've got 3 more to go. It is midnight 22 right now, so the things they do for you, the things they do for you.
From True Romance?
Look, I'm gonna be honest with you, Cass. I feel like if we go to this party and you dress like that, I ain't gonna ever hear the end of it.
In like a good way or a bad way?
In a bad way.
All right, so it is 1:30 in the morning the next day, and I just finished episode 6, and I have a lot of things to say. So the focus of this episode is McKay, who is Cassie's college-age boyfriend, who I believe plays football. Whenever people talk about sports, I like mentally check out, but I think he plays football, and this is yet another commentary on masculinity, and I thought it was really interesting because this is sort of a theme shared throughout some of the characters, right? So he is in some fraternity, right? And while he's having sex with Cassie one night, it's Halloween season, by the way. While he's having sex with Cassie, a bunch of frat guys come in and pull him off of her and hit him. And this really emotionally messes him up. And it's clear from the way that this episode starts that McKay is more of a sensitive person, like I mentioned earlier in the earlier episodes. But he is, of course, put under the pressure that all the men in this show are put under to maintain a certain air of masculinity. So what happens is he gets embarrassed in front of his girlfriend, and then he turns to her to have sex with her. And the sex that he has with her is very clearly quite degrading to her. She doesn't really want to have it. She is trying to react appropriately. She's shaken up, but his reaction is wanting to have sex with her so that he can feel reinforced in his masculinity once again. And it's interesting because the narration that Zendaya gives about him in the very beginning of the show, which again, I don't know how Zendaya knows so much about these characters as she barely interacts with. It doesn't really make sense, is that McKay likes to date Cassie because when she walks into the room, all of these men look at her, want her, and that makes him feel good because she is his. Now, of course, we sort of learn throughout this episode that that's not necessarily true. Cassie does have flirtatious relationships with people. She hasn't really gone anywhere with a lot of those relationships, but she's clearly talking and entertaining several other people, but definitely doesn't want to go too far because she does want to remain sexually monogamous with McKay. And so basically what happens is she feels really messed up after that party, and they do this other party, the actual high school party, and she feels more free and open. It's clear that she felt really out of place at the college party because she is younger than everybody. I mean, that is really hard to tell because all the actors look so old, but she's obviously younger, and McKay told her to cover up, whereas at this college party, she can let loose, and she's feeling kind of shitty from the night before, so she's going to, try to have some good time at this party. And she runs into the same guy that she ran into when she was at the carnival. And at the carnival, she sort of, in her Molly high, decided to approach this guy. And now when she's in a situation where she hasn't really felt that great with her boyfriend, she runs into the same guy again and kind of turns to him for attention. This is like the second time this happens, but they get to a point where they are about to have sex and she says, "Oh no, I don't want to have sex with you because of my boyfriend." And that's when he decides to go off and basically tell her that she is delusional for thinking that anyone would want to have anything to do with her if not for the desire to have sex with her.
You think I'm here because I'm interested in you? And what you have to say or what you think about things as if you're so fucking interesting? Fuck, are you dumb? You came on to me. Remember? And ever since then, you show up, you lead me on, and then you whine about your fucking boyfriend. Like every time you start talking, I think to myself, who the fuck does this girl think she is?
And this obviously upsets her and sends her into a spiral. And there's, again, a theme here. The theme of attributing your worth to your sexual access or your ability to satisfy men. Additionally, we see some really interesting nuances with Kat's character in this episode. So Kat at this point is full-fledged in her online dominatrix, shit. And she is really sort of finding this new persona doing this. And she is kind of entering into this phase where she started out as a virgin and now she is, really entertaining this newfound empowerment that she feels through sex. And in several situations we've seen before, she's kind of turned to guys and been like, "Hey, if you want to, have sex with me. All you have to do is say that. And there's this guy, Ethan, who has been courting her throughout the entire show. And who knows, maybe this character will change. But Ethan, from my perspective, is a guy who is a good, decent guy who is genuinely interested in her. And he hasn't really done anything to express otherwise. But when they were at the carnival the other day, Kat saw him speaking to a thinner, older girl. And she, from a distance, thought that he was interested in her, felt really upset about that, and then walked away and sped off to run into the guy who used to go to the high school, who is known as, some sexual king, I guess, and give him a blowjob and him behind the carnival. And that felt really great to her. She left that experience feeling like, oh my gosh, I just had the best sex of my life, and then went on to go and have sex with more people. And since they have split or not really interact with each other, she's gone off and had all these experiences. Well, they run into each other at this Halloween party, and they have their first sexual interaction, but only after Kat makes it clear that there's no way in hell she would ever date him. And you can tell that this kind of breaks his heart because he's really interested in her. And this is clear to the audience, but when he was having that conversation with that thinner girl earlier on, he was not flirting with her. He was not expressing sexual interest in her. And so she had just totally misinterpreted the entire situation. And here he is genuinely wanting to be with her, but she's not able to perceive it because she is just so deep in her hypersexual space right now. And I thought that was a really interesting depiction because I have 100% overlooked men who were definitely good for me or good to me because I was just so overwhelmed in my hypersexuality at the time. But, and we all have to go through this experience to understand ourselves better. But it is interesting to kind of see that she sort of missed out on what probably would have been the healthiest dynamic that she's ever brushed up against. And the interesting part about it was when they eventually do have their sexual interaction, Ethan establishes that he is a virgin.
Well, I don't fuck virgins.
And Kat almost laughs at him. It's kind of established that hooking up is very common in this culture. I mean, I guess it is these days. And Ethan, as a virgin in high school, is seen as strange. And I think as the audience, we're supposed to see that very clearly. These are teenagers. Yes, they're doing drugs and having sex and all this other shit, but these are teenagers. And it's normal for a teenager to not have had sex at that certain point in their lives, right? But it's seen as odd, and it's clear that, you don't quite see as the audience what Kat is doing as sexually empowering, not in a real way. But, one of the things I thought about when I was watching this is that I think that where Kat is a very common position for a lot of women who are plus size. I'll just say there are these women who feel so undesirable in their daily lives who turn to the internet and find a very niche community of people who are interested in them and will fetishize them. And that can feel really affirming. And some people can get a lot of confidence from that when you don't feel desired in your real, your real life. When you feel ignored in your real life and you feel hyper desired online, it can indeed influence confidence in you. We've seen several times over that since she's found this new confidence in herself, people are attracted to that. And I think that she's conflating that with men only wanting to have sex with her, when in reality, people are probably more attracted to her now because she's more confident in herself. And that doesn't necessarily mean that the only thing men want to do is have sex with her. But of course, because she's attributed that as her value and as her worth, that's how she's seeing it. So I guess I didn't really mention this, but one of the things that Nate does after he has that conversation with Jules is blackmail her. because Jules took these sexy photos and sent them to him. And technically that is distribution of child pornography. And so he tries to use that to blackmail her to say, I'm going to share this if you tell anyone what we've done here. And because he's under investigation, he tries to push that blackmail even more by getting Jules to go in and admit to seeing Maddie getting abused by the guy that raped her at the party. I put rape in quotations because, as we've established, Maddie lied and said that that's what happened when it wasn't what happened. She was trying to make him jealous, and that's not exactly what was the case. I gotta say, as an aside, I don't love this particular subplot. It does happen, but I don't love that aspect of it. And it is truly a situation where one little small lie is really getting out of hand. But anyway, it is, as you see, 1:30 in the morning. I need to watch 2 more episodes and take my ass to bed. I can't believe I thought I was going to go out at some point tonight. Nah. We are here watching this show, and oof, there are so many things to talk about.
She fell in love with every guy she ever dated. Whether they were smart or stupid or sweet or cruel, it didn't matter.
All right, it is 2:34 in the morning, and I just finished the 7th episode of Euphoria, and of course, I have some thoughts. So this episode focuses mostly on Cassie. By the way, Cassie found out that she was pregnant in the last episode, and surprise, surprise, McKay doesn't want her to keep the baby. Lots of commentary on that I'm not going to touch. Maybe I'll talk about it more based on how the last episode concludes, but let's just say I saw it going that way. So one of the things that I thought about when I was watching Cassie's portion is that they can make these actors look younger. Like, Cassie, when she was doing her flashback stuff, was obviously doing certain things with her appearance to look younger. And they can do that. They can absolutely do that. And I think that the age thing bothers me so much because I have a hard time looking at these people and seeing teenagers. Like a teenager, you know, they may have all of these various things that are reaching towards the type of adulthood that you enter into when you're in college. But for the most part, they're kids, and they're very obviously kids. With this show, these are all people clearly that are in their maybe mid to late 20s to 30s, and it's just very jarring to look at. I think Barbie Ferreira is the only one who kind of looks her age, but then again, I don't know how old she is, so maybe she is actually of that age. I don't know. Speaking of Barbie Ferreira's character, Kat, this was the episode where her friends are finally like, hey, we really don't like this new version of you. And you can kind of see that Kat is starting to have these thoughts in the back of her mind. She's kind of starting to regret a lot of this new persona that she's taking on. She started to have a client that is dominant, and this is the first time that we've ever seen her have a dominant client. And I think that it's not a coincidence that this is also the episode where you start to get the impression that she's really not enjoying herself. I'm interested to see where that goes because obviously, especially in high school, people outgrow each other. You know, I outgrew the vast majority of my friends when I was in high school. So it's common for people to change, but it's also pretty clear that this change that Kat is experiencing is not one that is positive for her. So I'm very curious to see where this particular part of the show will go. So again, speaking of Kat, I did not know that the guy that she dated in middle school was also the guy that Cassie had not quite slept with, but was going to sleep with. I thought that the scene where Kat has sex with Daniel and she mentions, oh, we like dated in middle school or something. And I totally thought I was going to lose my virginity to you. And that didn't turn out to be the case. And Daniel just like straight up didn't remember her, didn't even remember that they had dated. It just wasn't a important or impactful moment in his life.
It's funny, I always thought I was going to lose my virginity to you.
You're a virgin?
No, I mean when we were younger, when we dated.
We dated?
Yeah, in 6th grade.
You, right?
Yeah, for like 5 months.
And it just makes you really think about, there's these little things that happen in your life sometimes, and you can take on a whole other persona in so many ways to spite or in order to grow beyond how somebody treated you. But at the end of the day, that's in some situations giving that person a lot of power, because in truth, for a lot of people, what's incredibly impactful to you is not impactful to them. Like I've for sure done a lot of stuff in my life where I've shifted some things, sometimes in a really positive way, sometimes in a really negative way, to like spite somebody, or because I was trying to deal with the pain of a previous thing. And, I recognized with time that it just wasn't really what I really wanted. And it wasn't important to that other person enough for me to make it important to myself. I often would say that we shouldn't cry over people who aren't crying over us, right? I mean, feel your emotions, they're all valid, whatever, but like a lot of times you can get really wrapped up in doing all these spiteful things because you think somebody else is going to give up about it. But at the end of the day, they might not even care that much. So don't do things for them, do things for you. So this is I don't really even know how to phrase this, and I'm probably not going to say this correct, but one of the things that I'm kind of noticing in this show is that race isn't really a topic of discussion. What I mean by that is I don't think that every person of color needs to have, a race moment, but I think a lot of these characters feel pretty raceless. And what I mean by that is, I don't know how this was written. This is written by Sam Levinson. I don't know anything about him. I just see his name and know that that's his name. And it kind of just feels like a lot of the characters, especially the characters of color, are really missing like a nuance to their background that is influenced by their racial background. I mean, and I definitely felt that with Maddie's character, because not to say that there aren't, women just like that who are brown and have those aspirations, because there definitely are, but a lot of women who are from a similar background that I know grow up very, very religious, and in a way that would make what she's doing and how she's living very much not okay. And there are so many interesting conversations to have within that I think would have added more nuance to it. And I think that the fact that race isn't really a discussion or even a thing that's referenced throughout this show so far is kind of a mistake. Maybe I'm wrong on that, but I think that is just an oversight in some ways. And I definitely felt that in the way that Jules' narrative shifted in this episode. Now, I might be completely reaching when it comes to this, but so in this episode, Jules goes to New York I think it's New York, I don't remember, the city, to see one of her old friends. And she meets this old friend and they go out to a party with one of her roommates, I guess. And the roommate and Jules have a connection. And one of the things that Jules mentions is that she is mostly pursuing relationships with men in order to reinforce her femininity, which is a very accurate thing that a lot of trans women do. I've been there, so I get it. And I think that Jules is kind of having some awakenings where she's understanding that she's probably a lot more sapphic than she realizes. And when you really think about it, all of her relationships with men have been just completely abusive and not healthy, but have been within the moment validating to her. But she has deeper, more intimate, more emotional relationships with women. And a lot of women who are attracted to women go through this, where they are socialized to be with men and being reinforced by men. And then they end up in situations where they kind of recognize that was the program that they were given, and that was who they were told they should be. And that maybe if they were given the opportunity, they would be more sapphic than they currently are, right? So that's a common thing. But here's what I want to talk about as it comes to race. When Rue is narrating about Jules, standard in men, she makes a point of reiterating that all of these men are white, usually straight identified, and married, or attached in some way, right? She makes a really big point of pointing that out. Jules is relationships with women that we've seen so far on screen have all been with women who are at least partially Black. And one of the things that I've definitely noticed in sapphic media is that a lot of times you will see this weird dichotomy between, a Black woman and a white woman, where the Black woman is the more dominant and domineering person, and the white woman is the more submissive person, the lighter, more feminine person. And there's so many things to unpack with that, Not that I think that, Rue is definitely kind of like a rough and tough character. Not that I think the other woman that she was with was necessarily embodying that, but I find it to be very interesting that when we're having this conversation about her choosing specific partners to reinforce her, that she often chooses Black women. I think that's very interesting, and I don't know if that's for a reason. I don't know what that's about, but I thought that I would point it out because it just felt like an interesting thing. Hey Google, what time is it? 4:47 a.m. Girl, we're on our last episode. I'm excited to see how this ends. This is a good show. I will say though, and this is, maybe I will reiterate this after the show, but I'm still not a fan of Zendaya's character. And I realize that I don't know. I think it's the character, but I also think it's the acting, which is so strange because she's the main character, the biggest name, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But she is also, for me, the least inspiring performance of the crew. So I don't know what to tell yet. So anyway, last episode.
If you look at everyone inside, most of them are going to go on to live these lives that aren't even fucking worth mentioning. Not Jules. What about you?
Okay, so I finished the last episode. It is 4 a.m. I am sleepy, but I'm finally done. Well, I, was doing all this organization, so I can't sleep yet because I have to finish cleaning. But I have my final thoughts about the first season of Euphoria, so let's get into it. So this episode is prom, and there are all of these various things happening before and after and during prom, and that's what this whole episode is about. And, I really enjoyed some aspects of this episode, and there's a general criticism I have of the entire show that I will get to later. But for now, let's talk about Kat, who is my namesake, and frankly, I think probably the most well-rounded, best written character of the entire show. So essentially, Kat has this moment. Her mom is clearly very concerned for her. In the leading up to it, she is clearly at that understanding point of, fully dropping her facade. And she has a hair change moment. She cuts bangs into her hair, and you can just tell that this is like not working. And so she changes. And so she comes to prom and she meets Ethan, and she fully explains and communicates what her problems were, what her issues were, and they decide to take a chance at this relationship.
Because you're actually not like this. You're actually really kind, and you're actually really nice, and I'm so shitty, and I just wish I could go back.
Kat, I liked you since I sat down next to you.
And honestly, I loved her character arc just simply because, for me, it was the most well-rounded arc of all of the characters, where there was actually a demonstration of some sort of change, I know that maybe that structure is, I don't know, kind of typical and sort of common. I know that it is, people always say that the mark of good writing is a character change moment. And maybe that is cliche in these new, this new era of storytelling. But personally, I really, really enjoyed the way that her character was just wrapped up, honestly, because my biggest critique of this entire show in general, especially after watching the last episode, of the first season, is that there really isn't a lot of character development. So here's my general criticism of all of Euphoria. Euphoria is a show with these different, very, very relatable, very, very real characters who do tell some aspect of truth about being a teenager and, you know, going through changes and exploring yourself. I think that the characters on their own are great in general. I think that the characters are really good at, you know, just showing the nuance, okay? But these characters do not change. These characters do not shift. These characters do not learn. These characters remain static essentially throughout the entire show. In this episode, Rue comes up with this idea to run away to the city. Side note, I did not realize that they actually filmed this entire thing in Los Angeles. I don't know if the show's meant to be in LA, but they at least filmed the very last scene at the train station at Union Station, because I take that train all the time. I take that Metrolink all the time when I go to San Diego, so I know exactly where they were. And so, you know, as somebody who grew up in LA County, an hour outside of the city, but still LA County, I do understand the difference between people who live in the city and people who live outside of the city. And I do understand the desire to go to the city, because when you live, like I grew up, I'm 909 and it's boring as hell. So I get it. I get that sort of thing. Some of these characters make more sense if I'm thinking in terms of, you know, LA County. But anyway, Rue's consistent fear about Jules, especially after she went to the city to visit one of her friends and then met this woman, is that she's going to run away to the city and leave her where she is. And I think in reality, Jules is a person who has large aspirations of going to the city, you know, becoming a fashion designer and doing something big in her life, whereas Rue is not really even interested in participating in life as it currently is. And this is an inherent incompatibility, because of course Jules is not going to put aside her dream to, you know, spend time doing drugs with Rue in a small town. This is definitely a relationship for right now. And I would be pretty disappointed in Jules if she decided to, you know, not pursue her dream and to, you know, make herself smaller for Zendaya, who is, again, the most annoying character in my opinion. So essentially at prom, they come up with this grand idea to run away to the city. And by the time that they actually get to the train station, by the time that they actually have packed their bags and are ready to go, Jules decides to leave and Rue decides to stay. Now, Rue came up with this idea, but my impression is that she came up with it as a bit of a test to see if Jules was going to go to the city actually. And girl, I don't know why you thought that was not going to go any other way, because again, my general criticism, you haven't changed. Nothing about you's changed. Listen, maybe I need to learn more about addiction. I know that it's really hard to get out of that cycle. And going to my main criticism, Rue is essentially in the same exact position she was at the start of this show as she is currently at the end of the show. Like, there's no change. The only change is Jules. That's it. That's literally the only change in her character. And I didn't mention this throughout my reaction, but there is a character who is played by a guy that's from Fear the Walking Dead, who I can never remember his name, but he's very, very sexy. And he basically points out to Rue that Jules is probably just a replacement for an addiction. Right. And so, of course, when she leaves, in quotations, because she'll probably be like right back, when she leaves, she goes right back to relapsing. And the whole show ends with this musical scene where she's kind of dancing with this rhythmical choir or whatever. And the only person who interacts with her physically before she gets to that choir is her dead father. So I'm going to assume that that's kind of a, you know, suggestion of where she's headed potentially. I don't know. But I'm frustrated with the fact that Zendaya's character is in the same exact position as she was when she started. That's just kind of annoying to me, because in my personal opinion, there were so many reasons why that shouldn't have gone that way, especially when she wanted to hold on to Jules, but wasn't inspired enough by Jules' desire to not be around her on drugs to change her actions. But then again, to be real with you guys, I guess Jules started taking Jules started drinking a lot towards the end of it all. So maybe because Jules wasn't maintaining her sobriety, she felt less inspired to maintain hers. Who knows? But either way, it just frustrated me that things were basically exactly where they were when this all started. This is the episode where Cassie gets an abortion, and this is a really upsetting scene, but it's clear that for Cassie, this is kind of like reset. She is not with that guy anymore. She's not with McKay. Hell, I would dump him too, frankly, if you were consistently telling me that I was going to make your life harder. I mean, also, you're in college. It's kind of creepy, to be honest. But anyway, so she broke up with him. That's the whole thing. It is very firmly established at the prom that Nate and Maddie do indeed have an incredibly toxic relationship. At one point, the characters are like, they're going to get married, aren't they? They're going to have a really dysfunctional relationship. They're going to get divorced 3 times, but they're just kind of meant for each other, I guess. And frankly, I kind of see that. I mean, I feel really bad for Maddie, but one of the things I will say in terms of character is the only motivation I could possibly come up with for the reason why she would want to continue spending time with him, with Nate, is because he has money and is part of one of the most successful families in the city, and that might make room for the life she wants to live where she does nothing and looks cute. Maybe, but I don't know. Like, there's so many things about this that aren't worth it. I mean, even after Nate pulled all of those strings to get himself off of a conviction for abusing her, he still put his hands on her after the fact. So I'm only going to assume that that's going to get worse. Now, when it comes to Nate, there's a scene where Nate is essentially in the last game of his career as a high schooler. He's really trying to save it. And he wins, but his father is disappointed at him for some reason. And it's really clear that there's no way that he will ever be able to fully satisfy his father. The whole entire crowd erupted with applause and cheers, but he's, you know, his father is just sitting there disappointed. And I think that that just really showed the stoicness of it all, you know, the way that nothing will ever be good enough for him. And there's a scene where he comes in to criticize him, and then they get into this physical altercation. Cal runs away, and Nate is just in his room being angry and uncontrollably, you know, acting like a child, acting the way that a child would act, crying, screaming, pounding his feet, that sort of thing. And that is just a true representation of who he is as a character. You know what I mean? The fact that he is that at his core, that child who has never really been able to healthfully express those emotions and be heard, seen, and respected and celebrated for them. One thing I have not mentioned yet is that the music in this show, after about episode 3, is really good. And the prom was definitely all bops. There was some K-pop in there. You know, it was really, really good. And I liked the music. I will also say that, see, I'm glad I waited to watch this show, because it would have annoyed me if I went to this show based on what I saw on social media, especially when it comes to the fashion, because you don't really see this so-called euphoria makeup, at least extensively, until the last episode of the first season. Like, all of the euphoria makeup that people were trending forever was just on like the last episode or on Jules throughout the entire season. Like, that's it. So I don't know why everyone was trying to say that these were like iconic looks or whatever, and this was what the show was. I mean, based on the makeup trends, I thought this show was going to be based in the early 2000s, but nah, I guess it's just current Y2K throwback shit. Kill me. I guess I'm old, because those were my trends in high school. But anyway, I like the show a lot, but my, again, general criticism is none of these characters changed. Kat is like the only character that really shifted and changed. I guess maybe Cassie did, but then I don't know where that's gonna really go. I mean, hopefully, I don't hope, but I hope that she's learned some lessons, and maybe this experience she had with getting an abortion changes the way that she views relationships. I don't know, but I don't want any woman to have to go through that in order to feel that way. So that's upsetting. But yeah, I mean, I can't think of any other character that changed. I just cannot. Really, none of these characters really showed any growth. But you know, the thing is, I think that's kind of the style of this show. The style of this show is just kind of these characters interacting with each other and doing weird, traumatic shit all the time. And baby, I'm here for it. But you know, it's not exactly like a paradigm of cinema, I wouldn't say, but it is certainly entertaining and does start a lot of conversations. So that was me watching all of Euphoria season 1 in one sitting in an entire day. I apologize for this horrid lighting. I apologize for this vlog style video, but you know, guys, I'm trying something new. I'm trying out new stuff. I'm always trying to experiment, you know, on this channel, and I appreciate those of you guys have been patient with me. Let me know how you guys feel about these types of videos. I felt like there would be a lot of things to say about Euphoria, so I thought that I would do my reaction. And so yeah, there's a lot of other sort of movie reviews and things that I have planned for you guys, so stay tuned for that stuff, along with other content. And I would remind you guys that I'm gonna be way more on Patreon now because of some other changes that I'm making on other social medias. So yeah, check out my Patreon if you guys care. Anyway, I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.